I had a moment of mental vertigo of just like, we're starting this, but it wasn't the actual stabbing, it was just I gave myself a small panic attack and had a little lie down on the floor and then got back up and stabbed myself in the stomach, so it was all fine again.
You're listening to the Science Baby podcast with me, Kim.
And me, Layla.
We're two nerdy mums who have researched the crap out of parenthood.
Seriously, you do not want to see our internet search histories.
Each episode we chat about the why behind pregnancy, birth and everything that comes after.
Because babies don't come with a manual, but with one born every minute, we reckon we can figure it out. How are you?
Yeah, right. You right?
Oh, God.
Oh!
The child woke up this morning and chose, like, all the ways he could get under my skin.
Ooh,
I'm fully willing to accept that it's me, but oh my God, he's so annoying.
What do you mean, fully willing to accept it's you? No, it isn't.
I mean, if I was calmer and didn't let him needle me, I don't know, it's just, Mummy, read this book. I said, okay, well, give it to me. No. Okay. Well, you hold it then. No. Okay, I'll put it over there. No, read the book.
God.
Just one of those. Just one of those days. You know?
Yeah. Oh, I've heard so much about this. It's like, why is your child crying? My child is crying because I wouldn't let him eat the remote.
Yes.
Or I want carrots for dinner. Okay, why are you crying? Because you gave me carrots for dinner.
Yes.
Wait for that stage.
Terrifyingly common. And again, I think the only way to navigate it is to just not let it get to you. Mm-hmm. But a day in, day out of not letting it get to me, and some days I just need to let it get to me, and today it's getting to me. We had a small argument about the radio because he wanted the music on the radio. I said, well, look, it's the radio. It's broadcast radio. We can't change it. That's what you get. You get what you get. But of course, he's spoiled. He's grown up in a on-demand world where he can see whatever he wants, whenever he wants, and the radio is just not acceptable.
The Netflix generation.
Yeah, Vernon Kay did not do it for him.
Oh, right. How rude. He's a national treasure, that man.
I know.
How dare you?
I mean, don't get me wrong. I would prefer more music on the radio as well. But you know, we get what we get, don't we?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I'm a bit of a psychopath. I like listening to people talk. I used to listen to LBC in London.
Yes.
London's. No, they call it. What is it called now? They changed their tagline. Anyway, I'm going off track. Anyway, talk radio, love it.
Yeah, I don't get me wrong. Talk radio has got its time and a place, but when you've got a very whingy child in the car, that is not the place all the time.
And not the catharsis you need on a day like you're having.
No, it's fine. Everything's fine. How are you?
Yeah, good. All right. We're going away on Sunday.
Exciting.
We're in full admin mode, packing lists all over the place. Nothing's packed yet, but we've got lots of packing lists.
Well, that's the way to do it, so that you get to about, 4 hours before you're due to leave the house, and you just like go, but you've got a list, so that's how we do it.
Yeah, that's the plan.
I have just put it on my to-do list to write a packing list.
I love that.
The meta list.
Yeah. Because then you feel like you've done something. You get that little dopamine hit, and that's all you needed in that moment.
Yeah. So you're flying with Stella.
Flying with Stella for 12 earthly hours.
And of course, you're all first class, and you've got an entire suite for her entirely by yourself. Yes?
Yeah, we're in the Emirates presidential suite, of course. Yes, we and all of the telly money that I have, famously very lucrative. No, absolutely not. We're in cattle class. We don't even have a bassinet on the way out. So she's on my lap for 12 hours.
Crikey.
Hopefully asleep.
I am dying to know how that goes for you.
Oh, me too.
I think they're just these things you don't know until you get there.
Yeah.
You know, we took everything, and in the end he slept on the way out. And then we had a twilight flight, and we thought, yeah, he'll definitely sleep. No, far too exciting. Didn't sleep on the way back, so there you go.
We will see, hey? Oh, God. We have no clue how it's going to go. We've got competing factors, as I'm sure was the case for you and Felix, in that Stella's a great sleeper at night. Mm-hmm. Tick. She's also very interested in her surroundings.
Aha!
Big cross.
So,
who
knows?
Yeah, can't wait to update you.
I'm so excited.
I'll just need to sit here and stare just past the camera for a bit, if you don't mind just filling for that episode.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll be traumatised.
For sure. I'll just get Felix to come in and make plane noises for you to really give you that really good flashback vibe.
Thanks, mate. I can always count on your support. No, it'll be fine. excited about today?
Yeah, so we're following up on IVF. So last episode you asked me about what's involved in IVF, and I talked for over an hour. Yeah, it turns out quite a lot is involved in the process. Almost as much about the sort of testing and the referral and all like accessing the treatment, as well as kind of breaking down the nuts and bolts of the treatment. So we spent last episode talking about that, but a lot of what we didn't touch on are some of the longer lasting consequences, the risks, the impacts, what it means to be an IVF parent and an IVF mum. So that's what we're going to talk about today, I guess.
Because, of course, the decision to start and the knowledge of the practical process is just like the first hurdle, isn't it?
It's the first hurdle to actually figuring out what your life as an IVF parent will look like. I have to say, like, when we went into it, that is pretty much all I thought about. I did the cursory Google of like, oh, well, is there a statistically significant risk of my IVF baby being in some way massively different to a naturally conceived baby? Yeah. And having contented myself with the fact that, no, they're not. You know, there's been 12 million IVF births, and by now we would have noticed something. You know, I was like, cool, well, let's just go ahead with it. And if you actually look at the actual nuts and bolts of the procedure, you know, it's all to do with getting the eggs and sperm isolated, getting them fertilised and then putting them back in. It's actually quite a small part of the overall growth of a baby, of what's involved in growing a baby. And so, you know, you think, oh, okay, as long as we can get through that, then everything's going to proceed exactly as it would with a natural pregnancy.
Yeah, because obviously we've blanched at the word natural pregnancy, natural birth before. And the reality is this is a natural pregnancy in the sense that the cells and the genes have done everything they would normally do in the wild. You've just squidged them together to overcome some sort of obstacle.
Exactly. I love the idea that you're describing the inside of my body as the wild.
Well, yes, we have met. Where would you start then in terms of the wider implications?
Well, I think to start with, to think about some of the additional benefits that IVF can offer, because it might not just be a fertility issue you're looking at. There could be something else going on with mother, father, the whole process that involving science in can actually help to overcome. And I suppose it does come under the larger umbrella of infertility, but the sheer amount of testing that you undergo and the fact that you've already got the egg, sperm, embryos out of the body to be able to test means that you are able to overcome certain hurdles. So, for example, a major cause of a lot of pregnancy losses, miscarriages, is a sort of genetic mismatch in the eggs and sperm. And that is something that can either manifest very early on, which can cause a miscarriage, a pregnancy loss, or it could manifest later on as a genetic disease. You know, famously Down syndrome, trisomy, is where you have a mismatch of chromosomes and you actually, instead of having a pair of chromosomes, you get 3 chromosomes. So there is a whole range of genetic misalignments or imbalances that can cause problems all the way through, you know, gestation and young life. And having an embryo in front of you where you are able to actually look at those genetic markers means that you actually immediately have the ability to screen for those kinds of imbalances. And so, you know, it's a muddy world because obviously go too far down that road and you're going into the route of eugenics, of like, what's the pop phrase?
Oh yeah, designer babies.
Designer babies, that's it. Yeah, of designer babies and choosing what you want. But, you know, what's been clinically approved, and this has actually happened to a friend of mine who was suffering repeated miscarriages. They had testing to find that they were genetically imbalanced. They kept getting the mismatch of the chromosomes. And up at Guy's Hospital, they had a screening for the embryo that they had reimplanted into her as part of the IVF process to make sure it was a balanced one.
Wow.
And so, you know, we're not talking designer babies. We're just talking, let's make a baby that's not incompatible with life.
Yeah. Which, I mean, is it too much to ask? Absolutely. And, it's completely separate from this question of, oh, yeah, but are we circumventing evolution by screening these babies. No, we're simply removing disease.
We have been circumventing evolution since the time of the ancient Greeks, in that case.
Indeed.
Yes.
Indeed.
You know, that's kind of what humans have done, is circumvent evolution in different ways. And we will continue to do that. But yeah, I mean, if it's just a simple error, and it's actually not something that is, you know, it's not like a genetic disease that's being passed down. It's kind of just a predisposition for embryos to kind of get a bit screwed up as they go. And my friend now has a perfectly happy, healthy daughter. She's perfectly balanced. She's got no problems, and they're very happy parents.
Wowzers.
And then, you know, other things, the amount of testing and the intervention that you are inviting when you have IVF and sort of any kind of assisted reproduction is the ability for specific medications to your situation, which again is not something that you can easily access if you're just going at it in the wild. You know, for instance, a blood test revealed that I had some kind of clotting disorder. Now, it's not something that would affect me in my day-to-day. You know, it's not like I'm always clotting and then like I've just got blood clots floating around. But I have a predisposition to clotting, and they thought that might have been the cause of an initial pregnancy loss. And so what they did, just as a precaution, is that they prescribed me with a form of anti-clotting medication. And actually, that took the form of an injection that I took alongside all of my other injections during the IVF process, during early pregnancy, and then again after birth. It wasn't a great deal of fun. It was, you know, daily injections. My belly and thighs were completely black and blue from it. But I tell you what, you get really good at taking injections. But if that meant that it succeeded where, you know, if that had been the cause, then we overcame that. So that was, you know, that was a great benefit.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
I can't imagine the placental environment is a place where you want random clotting to occur.
Well, quite.
So
exactly.
That's really important and potentially key. That's fantastic.
Yeah, and because, you know, it wasn't a big deal, it's just we were already on that scientific intervention conveyor. So we're like, well, let's try this. So I was very grateful to be able to try an alternative approach that would try to make it more successful for me.
A scientific conveyor is a lovely way of framing that. That's my favourite.
Well, it's a great word for a harsh reality, unfortunately.
Yeah. I'm really interested in the kind of the practicalities of, like, you know, kind of from beginning to end, like how long your process was, and was that representative of what you know about IVF?
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, when we were facing it down, when it looked like this referral was going to be on the cards, we did a lot of calendar studying, as I think I said last week, to try and work out how long is this going to take? How long are we going to be in the throes of medical attention, if you like? And we was quite pleasantly surprised that once the treatment started, it was pretty self-contained because it's based around your natural menstrual cycle. A cycle of IVF theoretically is less than a month. About a month. You know, even if you have the downregulation where you sort of flatten out your cycles for a couple of weeks before you start the cycle, that's still only around a month between downregulation, stimulation of the eggs, and then the egg retrieval, fertilization, and embryo transfer, with all the hand gestures to go along with it, are you know, that all happens within 5 days.
Yeah, again, it's like, you know, you say with the conveyor, you know, that's entirely appropriate because once everything's kind of kicked into gear, you've then got this like unstoppable machine, to use just as romantic a term as the wild for a body. You've got this unstoppable machine, so you have these windows where things need to happen, otherwise you'll get left behind and you need to then flip to the next cycle.
Yeah. So, I mean, you do have to clear your calendar for this, but it's not... If you are having repeated cycles over and over again, yes, it is going to feel like your entire world is ruled by IVF and medicalisation. And we sort of felt that with the sort of cascade of testing that led to the referral and then the treatment. But, you know, looking back at it, we were referred in the January of 22, and after 2 transfers, I was pregnant in the June. So that was basically 5 months, of which that included 2 cycles, which, you know, I think you can attest to how quickly 5 or 6 months can go past.
That's amazing. That's so much quicker than I was expecting you to say.
Yeah.
Because I guess anecdotally, you know, you sympathise a lot with families who are going through IVF because it's arduous and unrelenting. And I guess with that comes the assumption that it is this never-ending quagmire of uncertainty. But I suppose, it's a really interesting counterpoint.
I think, the counterpoint is that a lot of people who are facing fertility issues face fertility issues that are potentially unrelated to the fertilization side of things. So IVF can only take you so far, and so they may still be experiencing loss after loss after loss and unsuccessful transfers, and that's where it can become a chore. It can be, a real slog. And if you listen to any podcast where anybody's talking about IVF, they talk about it as being a slog. And in that sense, I feel very lucky that for me it didn't feel like a slog. But I count myself as very lucky as not having to go through that cycle over and over and over again. So, there's two sides of it. And again, you won't really know that until you get into it. And it's even worse if those cycles and that slog can ultimately end up with nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, given what a normal cycle looks like in your experience, you've got all these tests going on, as you say, as part of the conveyor. Is it likely, in your experience, that kind of those tests and the outcome of the tests can kind of slow things down? Or is it that the workflow, if you will, is designed so that something is detected at a certain time so that you can then intervene if needed at the right time, X, Y, Z? Do you know if there's a whole spectrum of things that could hold the process up?
I feel like my experience, again, from only 2 transfers, is that the testing all happens right at the beginning. And you get sort of a portfolio of your fertility profile, if you like, of what your tubes look like, what your ovarian reserve looks like, what their sperm quality looks like. And so that's what you go in, you clutching, metaphorically, your little file of like, well, this is who we are and, our fertility stats. And from then on, there wasn't a whole lot of testing. They just do the process and then they see, how you're responding, I suppose. And so I can only speak to my limited experience, but when we had our first unsuccessful transfer and we went back into the clinic, there wasn't any major modification of the process. They just said, well, do you want to go for another cycle? And I said, well, no, I'll just go for the frozen transfer. They didn't suggest changing the clotting medication. They didn't suggest changing the dose. They did change the pessaries that I was using because I had a very unpleasant experience with the pessaries the first time, and so they used a slightly different formulation. It's still completely the same medication, but it was like pill form rather than capsule form or something like that, but it still goes in there, still horrible. But, as far as I know, they can make modifications as they go along, but there's not a huge amount of like sort of novel testing because that's unlikely to change, I think. Yeah.
So it's all front loaded, which makes total sense. Okay.
Yeah.
And so, because obviously you went for frozen transfer for the second one, and presumably does that have as much admin associated with it, or can that in theory be a bit quicker because sort of half of the work's already done, to put it in a really crude way?
Yeah. So you don't really have to do any medication leading up to it. I did the anti-clotting injections, but that was just my personal situation. You literally just turn up on the day and they tell you whether your embryo has survived the thaw, which is a 1 in 5 chance, and then you carry on taking your pessaries for a couple of weeks and see how you get on. So in a sense, and that's why we chose a frozen transfer in the second time round, is I had somewhere to be, and so I couldn't afford to give over a month of my time. You could have 2 weeks.
Yes.
You can have 1 day, and it seems ridiculous in the time, but it worked for us. And obviously, Felix was totally on board with that from embryonic form.
He was all over it like a rash.
Like a rash, yeah.
How did you and Doug feel the morning of that transfer, knowing that there was every chance that you could arrive there and they could sit you down and say, we're so sorry, it's not happening today?
I mean, nervous, obviously, but you're on the conveyor. What are you going to do? No, you're just going to turn up and you've got to find out one way or another. It's just that we had to drive 30 minutes to the clinic before we could find out. So, yeah, I mean, we knew that there would be more chances because fortunately we did fall within the criteria for NHS funding, and in our area and my age, we were entitled to 3 full cycles. And as I understand it, and this was never quite clear, and as it turned out, it didn't really matter, but a full cycle is a cycle that includes an egg collection.
So it's a full shebang.
Full shebang. So the frozen transfer didn't even count within that cycle.
Oh, that's interesting.
Now, again, please fact check me, and also it varies massively by local area. So if this is something that you're thinking about and you're in that realm, definitely something worth checking. Yeah. So yes, we were obviously nervous going into our frozen transfer, but we'd already had one loss. I knew what that felt like. We knew that we could have more without having to start questioning our life choices. So it was still kind of just another step on the road.
Yeah, and I can imagine pragmatism is an excellent defensive mechanism. I think.
I was carried by the force of pragmatism. I wouldn't say that I was in denial about how I felt. I genuinely didn't engage with the emotional side of it at all. It didn't occur to me to engage with the emotional side of things, because I did always look at it as a conveyor of like, okay, well, there's, it's a scientific process. It's, you pour your solute in there, you titrate your universal indicator, whatever. It's just like you go through.
Yeah.
You go through the process, you go through the steps. And, that's kind of my slightly nerdy, socially awkward side showing. Because I know that a lot of people feel the ups and downs of an IVF journey very acutely. And for me, I found that just dissociating. It wasn't even a conscious dissociation. It was just like, well, this is happening now. So, I get up, I inject myself with this, I inject myself with that. I go to bed, I shove that up my hoo-ha. It's just, you go for it. But that, I think, came at a cost, because essentially what I was doing was climbing a cliffside without looking down. And I got to the top and then I looked down. And it is genuinely a feeling of vertigo of everything that we went through to get there. And some people just took the cable car up there. I don't know, I've stretched that analogy far too far.
No, that makes so much sense, because you don't know how much you've got until it's there.
Yeah.
And you're thankful for it.
Yeah. But, there's an element of resentment for people who find it easy, who just, I love people who plan and then it all goes to plan. I just, even the idea of a unsuccessful couple of years of trying is out of the realms of experience for the majority of people. I used to feel very bitter about TV programs that would say, oh yeah, we're trying for a baby next month. Oh, we've got a baby. Because that is unrealistic. It does happen in a lot of cases, but it's not always. So the Brooklyn Nine-Nine was one of my favourite series when we watched it. Have you seen it?
Some of it.
Yeah.
Not all of it.
Okay, well, I'm going to spoil it for you. But
please.
A couple on there are trying for a baby and they try everything and it's unsuccessful for a long time. And I loved that representation of a difficult journey for people. Now, you can get worked up about that journey, but they would say that that doesn't help, obviously. And I felt like we'd been going on so long that, the IVF was just the next step, and each test and each intervention and, even the interventions that came at the other end of the pregnancy, which I'll get onto in a little bit, it was all just necessary to bring our child into the world. And then we get there and I look back and I go, that was a lot. And I'm still, we're nearly 3 years in now, and I'm still just feeling a little bit, some bits are hard to look, I can't look down that cliff without feeling a little bit, I don't know, a whole range of emotions. Anxious for the past me, resentful, just like, oh my God. And, when we argue, when Doug and I argue, I think of what we've been through. All of this we went through together. Why are we arguing now? Well, because there's this tiny little aggressor in between us. I believe it's changed my attitude to parenting compared to my friends who have had an easier ride of it. One where they haven't had to think about every step of the journey or haven't had to be actively involved, if you like, in every step of the journey. Maybe I'm just selling it to myself, but I feel like I am clingier. I want to spend more time with him. You know, that's partly because we're older parents. We know we're not going to do it again. You know, I don't want to miss this. But also, he is so incredibly precious. And of course, that's not to say that every mother doesn't find their child precious. But, like, he's just this medical miracle. And I don't want to let him go.
Yeah. You've been intimately involved in every bottleneck of uncertainty where things couldn't have gone right.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you're pragmatic about something and you think, well, if it doesn't happen, then it was meant to be, or it didn't, that's fine, we'll just try again. But I think then when it does happen and you end up with this thing, I think you have all of this backwards leaning anxiety about, oh my god, imagine if it hadn't gone right, you wouldn't have Felix, or whatever.
It is genuinely a form of PTSD, I think, and I don't feel like it's acknowledged enough. I've not seen anyone about it. I don't have time. I've got a toddler. But I think it's made me a more anxious person. It's made me a more highly strung person. I'm still very pragmatic, but I'm also quite easily toppled these days.
But you must come out of it emotionally a little bit bruised, I imagine.
Yeah. And that has ramifications across the whole of your life, basically your life experience, I feel. But I like the way you put, you've invested in every bottleneck, because that's definitely, that is literally what you're doing. You are stopping and thinking about every single stage, because somebody else is involved at every single stage, so you have to be aware that it's happening. You are not going to be aware, as somebody who's going through a natural conception, of the moment that the egg and the sperm meet, and you're not going to be aware that 5 days later the cells that become the baby split from the cells that become the placenta. You have no idea about that. But when you go through IVF, you are so invested in that. And you're like, is it an A grade or is it a B grade? And it matters so much. And even before you enter that process, you have to there are so many disclaimers and terms and conditions and warnings and risks that you have to read. And there's videos that you have to watch. And actually a lot of those risks are no different to risks that you would find in a normal pregnancy. So IVF has a risk of duplicates, twins if you like. It used to be higher because they used to transfer 2 embryos at the same time. So if you're putting 2 embryos in, if they both take, then you're going to end up with 2. But even if you implant a single embryo, there is a slightly higher chance that single embryo will split to make identical twins.
Really?
I don't know the science of that, but I read it in our disclaimers, all of that sort of stuff.
Wow.
So as a result of that, you have to go through reams and reams and reams and reams of, these are the risks of twins. The mother can have all of these problems, the baby's low birth weight, the risk of this twin to the other twin, and all the different forms of twinning that you can have, and all of that sort of stuff. And actually, so yeah, it is incredible that there is a slightly higher risk of identical twins with IVF pregnancies. But actually, it's not that much of a difference for the chance of twins in a natural pregnancy. But you're not forced to sit down, just before you have sex to conceive, you're not forced to sit down for 3 hours with your partner and go through, yes, well, the mother could die.
Oh, it really puts you in the mood, doesn't it?
Oh, yes, the baby could die. Oh, yes, the C-section. Yeah, and it's like you are staring down everything that we know about pregnancy and birth-related science. You have to sit there and acknowledge it because they have to do it for legal reasons.
My goodness. Imagine if we had a legal disclaimer every time we tried to conceive in the bedroom. Darling, 1 second, we've forgotten the PowerPoint presentation. Would you mind turning the lights back on?
And it went on and on. And honestly, it was 3 hours at the kitchen table. And we're just sinking further and further. And there's loads of other things, just the risks associated with birth. And you have to say, I acknowledge those risks and I accept them. Which, of course, you do. Yeah. If I want a baby, I acknowledge that there is a risk involved in carrying and birthing that baby. But you don't have to sit there through a bloody presentation and then sign a form.
The consent form the morning of our cesarean was a hoot, as you can imagine.
Yes.
It was brilliant. Because they have to point certain things out to you that are particularly serious. And you're like,
I had an epidural and I had to do a consent tick for that, and they gave me a laminated and quite battered information sheet about the various risks associated with an epidural, and I'm like in excruciating pain, covered in my own vomit, and I'm just like, where do I smear some bodily fluids to agree to this?
Do you accept a smear of blood? That is fine. Oh my God. And so, obviously, all of this is going on in your noggin, and that's a lot. But obviously, you're undergoing a lot of physical interventions, in sequence in quite a short period of time. Physically, how did you do with that?
At the time, Dr. Pragmatic over here, it was fine. It was actually, I'd never really had any medical procedures prior to the IVF. I'd never been sedated. Perhaps some people might argue that I needed to. No. I had never once been rendered incapable in my whole body. So I was quite nervous about that, but that went fine, apart from the faint that then gave Doug a heart attack. Yeah, it was fine. It was all fine. The injections, I'm not bad with needles, so I was able to give myself the injections. The very first one that I did, I had a moment of mental vertigo of just like, we're starting this, but it wasn't the actual stabbing. It was just I gave myself a small panic attack and had a little lie down on the floor and then got back up and stabbed myself in the stomach, so it was all fine again. And yeah, I was actually fine, a little bit sore after the egg collection, but for the actual IVF and the conception process, that was fine. And my pregnancy was great. I had a fantastic pregnancy. In the large part, IVF pregnancies tend to proceed similarly, if not, track along with natural pregnancies. But there are some reports of IVF babies having some trouble, especially later on in pregnancy, things like low birth weight, preterm birth, things like that. There's a higher risk of preeclampsia. But as we have talked about with several things in the past, this is not necessarily a causation thing. It's a correlation thing where these problems that may be happening because there's twins involved. It may be happening because of the aforementioned fertility problems. The whole reason that you're having IVF in the first place, the older age, the slightly faulty uterus, those are the things that are going to be causing the problems in pregnancy, not the fact that the baby was fertilized outside the womb. Mm-hmm. And so for me, because I didn't have any of those problems, my pregnancy went absolutely gloriously until the very end. Because of those risks, because of those measurable but conflated risks associated with IVF pregnancies, as standard, IVF pregnancies are treated as high risk in the UK. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that you get a little bit of extra monitoring, which is a great thing. But it also means that you are extremely heavily pressured to induced birth. If you don't go into labour by 40th week, you will be forced. I hate to say that word because you're not forced, but we really tried to not have an induction and we failed. And I'm quite a pushy person.
Right. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it gets muddy because obviously, there's a reason that there's a lot of a buzz around advocating for yourself during birth. But we really, really didn't want that intervention, that induction. And we ended up having it. And because ultimately, if they're saying, oh, well, there's a risk, in order to refuse that, you're saying, well, I don't care about the risks to my child anymore. And if something had happened, you never would have forgiven yourself. But in the end, that turned out to be the worst part of the entire process for me. And it is born of the fact that it was an IVF pregnancy, but I ended up having an induction way earlier than Felix was ready to come out. Mm-hmm. I was in hospital for 4 days before I gave birth. I laboured for 96 hours. I had every single pain relief, every form of intervention, and still ended up with a C-section. And because of the complications of having been in hospital that long, my recovery was very poor. And I'm still physically, my body is still, well, it's basically from all of that. And that, again, is another noggin tweaking thing because, it's changed what I believe my body's capable of now. Mm-hmm. And it's, come to terms with it. It's fine. But you just think, if we could have conceived naturally, none of this would have happened. And I can't blame the IVF, but it's just the way, it's the conveyor. And, I will talk about this to anyone who will listen, about how we were told in our NCT class, basically, if you accept one intervention once you're in hospital, there is what's called a cascade of interventions, where as soon as you're on this conveyor, it sort of sweeps you along, and it's very difficult to get off it. And inductions can lead to epidurals, which can lead to forceps deliveries or C-sections, or, things like that. And so if you're the sort of person that wants to keep birth as natural as possible, then be wary of even opening the door an inch.
And actually, on reflection, I can say with a great degree of certainty that was why I was keen to go for a caesarean birth when we had the news that Stella was on the big side, so birth might be risky. I almost wanted to cash out and take control and say, right, we'll go straight to the end point where we can book that in and know exactly what's going to happen, rather than have the uncertainty and the suspicion that it would cascade and escalate into potentially a situation that then I would no longer feel in control of. And we had a fantastic experience. We're very, very lucky. And I can't help but feel that part of that was because I consciously tapped out of any of that. Yeah, it's just not very nice. And so it must be very interesting to reflect on, because it's a really difficult subject, because it's based around the what if, because you have no way of knowing what the other universes look like that branched out from that decision.
If only.
Yeah, and so it's a really difficult one to resolve in your head and get closure from, I can imagine.
And I, my attitude to it once I sort of came up for air after this had all happened, was like trying to figure out why this had happened to me, and if it was the IVF, and if I was justified in fighting the induction and the ensuing interventions. And I'm still trying to get to the bottom of it, but there is a huge body of evidence that says, yes, well, there are risks associated with IVF pregnancies, but they are the risks that are associated with older births, female fertility issues and things like that. And right now, in the fantastic English Health Service, there is unfortunately no latitude for treating it that granularly. They don't want to say, oh, well, you've got this list of complicating factors, you'll be fine, we won't do it. They don't want to run the risk, and they don't want you to sue them ultimately. And so they'll say, no, you're an IVF pregnancy. IVF pregnancies are associated with these risks. That's what we're doing. And that's the narrative I got all the way through till the end.
Yeah.
And whether that's the right thing or not, I still don't know. Because, I don't know what the universe looked like. Maybe if it hadn't have happened, my placenta would have fallen out, because that's something that can happen later on. Again, potentially because of uterine issues, but we don't really know. There's not enough science been done. But maybe, my placenta would have fallen out and there would have been huge complications and Felix could have died in birth. So, you don't know.
Yeah, and so your brain just keeps going over and over and stressing you out.
I tell you, it's a head it's a total head
Yeah.
But so physically my body's screwed. I mean, I say it's screwed. I've got various abdominal unpleasantries.
My muscles haven't come back together yet.
Yeah, no muscles, no feeling in my lower belly skin. Just, it's all substandard, basically. Nothing life-threatening, but substandard. And
that's such a good way of describing the postpartum body. Nothing life-threatening, but substandard.
But no, I mean, we can laugh about it, but it makes me less inclined to be intimate. It makes me a lot less confident about my body. And that has a big effect on a mother who is going through profound mental changes associated with the hormonal shifts in her body and brain. Oh, that's the other thing. I'm convinced, and I don't know enough about the science, that having pumped myself with this many hormones has made me more hormonally sensitive than ever before. Now, it could be perimenopause, but I also think that, I am way more emotional than I ever used to be on a monthly cycle. I get so angry and I get so upset and just like, the deepest gloom. Oh, and then my period starts and everything's, that's why. I never used to be like that before. So I've always wondered if pumping these artificially high levels of hormones around my body has actually affected how my body responds to those hormones now. Don't know. That's just pure speculation.
That's a really, really interesting thing. I don't know if any research has been done on that, and it'd be great to know if anyone out there is more au fait with the research on it. And I guess it's impossible to unpick from the permanent emotional changes that your brain has undergone as well.
Exactly.
It's impossible.
And also, I'm just so close to the edge all the time.
Yes. Hormones, motherhood,
hormones. Yeah. So mentally and physically, that's kind of where I've been left. Now, I will say, there is science out there that does say that, there are tangible risks to people who have gone through IVF. Mm-hmm. There are links between the process and various ovarian complications later on in life. So ovarian cysts, which is where you just get like massive growth out of control within your ovary, which is linked to ovarian cancer. There's a slightly higher incidence of that. Breast cancer, same thing. But again, that's super complicated by the reduction in risk of breast cancer from breastfeeding and all of the other triggers and exposures that you get that can change your risk. So it's quite another thing that's quite difficult to unpick.
This is all against the background, I'm assuming, of the hormones and the artificial timing, magnitude, and all the other bits of the hormonal changes that you're putting into your body. A lot of these cancers can be driven or modulated by hormones, right? And is that what's going on here? It's because of all the hormonal changes?
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. I mean, certainly, breast cancers are quite linked to estrogen, as we know. And so higher levels of estrogen can increase the likelihood of certain breast cancers. As far as I know, estrogen isn't one of the hormones that you're injected with. You have progesterone pessaries, but I don't know enough about the sort of biology of cancers and interaction with hormones, but I can see how that is a viable mechanism that could feed back. Yeah.
I guess, as you say, it's likely to be much more complicated than that, potentially feedbacks and all that business, as tends to happen with hormones.
Yeah.
So obviously there are, as we've talked about, there is a lot that comes with an IVF pregnancy, a lot of risks to you, a lot of risks to baby. On the other hand, of course, IVF is the most amazing scientific gift because it allows you to eliminate certain disorders, certain diseases. It allows you to have a baby when that may not have been possible otherwise. So it's a double-sided coin, as a lot of medical things are. So in terms of obviously, because it's all to do with probability, isn't it? This whole question is to do with probabilities. And so is there any research on the success of IVFs or otherwise?
I mean, yeah, so there's been at least 12 million IVF births in the world so far, which is wild. That's like the population of London, Greater London, something like that.
That's mental.
Which is fantastic. And we're getting to the point now where it's a very common procedure. And now about 1 in every 32 babies is conceived via IVF, which is incredible. So, you think about that in terms of a school classroom. It's like 1 kid in every class is going to be an IVF baby, which is just mild. It's not a marginal procedure anymore. It's a fully embraced medical process that can bring about babies. Having said that, it's not guaranteed to work. And on average, in the UK, there's a 1 in 3 chance that your cycle is going to be successful. So that means that you could have 3 cycles and only the last one will work. For us, it was the second transfer as a second embryo. So in a sense, it was a 1 in 2 chance. And I think that's tied into why the NHS offers 3 cycles. Because, statistically, they're playing with the statistics that, you're likely to get a hit in those 3. They've got to pick a number from somewhere. However, when you look a little bit deeper into the statistics, age is a huge, huge factor. So if you're having IVF when you're younger, between the ages of about 18 and 35, then there's like, I think it's a 42% chance of success for each cycle. So that, nearly 1 in 2 chance. Whereas once you get to over 40, so only 5 years later, there's only a 16% chance of success.
Bloody hell.
So it drops off a cliff. So, if it were me, I'd be like, oh, well, the over 40s need more free cycles. They need 5 free cycles at least, if not more, in order to guarantee it. But again, NHS has got to draw the line somewhere. So they just do it in the other direction, which I don't fully understand. But they
Capitalism!
Ding-ding! So it's not a guaranteed thing, but for somebody who might have been struggling, if you've been trying for 2 years, then that's 24 potential months, potential goes you've had. And so, from 0 in 24 to 1 in 3, that's a huge increase. Oh. Even to 1 in 6, that's a huge increase.
Yeah.
If you are somebody who is facing down the barrel of a fertility journey, if you've been going at it for a little while, then IVF is a really well-tested, safe on the whole, and effective way of upping your odds of getting a baby. Mm-hmm. And so, on balance, after all of it, I would say it's definitely worth it. But within this process, we've talked about how it affects you physically, how it affects you mentally. You are never alone. Once you start seeing somebody about your fertility, you're never going to be alone with your problems anymore, literally, because they'll be shining as a floodlight down your business end. There's lots of people you can talk to. There's going to be your GP at the very start. There'll be the fertility consultants within the hospital. There'll be the clinicians. There'll be every ultrasound tech and embryologist. And my advice would be to ask questions. Don't do that ridiculously British thing of nodding and smiling and not knowing what the hell anyone's talking about, because you don't want to look like a fool. Like, this is a really nuanced medical procedure, and your case is unique to you. So ask the bloody questions.
You have every right to know the ins and outs of your own vagina.
Exactly, and ask them while you're still in the room. While you're in the room, they've got their attention on you, and you've got their attention. This happened to us with one of the arguing about the induction issues. We went in to try and argue against our induction, and we came out and we seemed to have agreed to an even earlier induction. And Doug and I stood in the waiting room and we were just like, what the hell just happened?
Oh, wow.
And it was because we didn't stop and say, whoa, let's all just make sure we're on the page here. I don't want an induction. And he basically, he's just like, oh yeah, we'll do it at 39 weeks instead. I was like, no. Anyway, we came back from that. But yeah, ask questions while you're still in the room. Don't be afraid of looking like an idiot, because compared to these people, you are an idiot. But it's your body, it's your family, it's your journey. And you need to make sure that you are all on the same page.
It's your right.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's it for this week's episode of the Science Baby Podcast.
Did you go through IVF? Let us know your journey, because I would love to hear more.
Join the chat on Instagram, or find this and every episode of the podcast at thesciencebaby.com.
See you next time.